In this video, I will be designing and implementing a new guild to be added to the Doors of Trithius. And this guild is going to be out in the forest, placed in a location kind of like where I am now. They're going to be a peaceful group related to nature and coincidentally introducing the player to the first school of magic, which is nature magic. Now, where are we at? Well, in pre-planning stages, I had sent a request to our artist, Drixel, laying out kind of the idea here for this. Now, this is just a mock-up. This isn't necessarily exactly what it's going to look like. And that's partly why I'm looking at it, honestly, is I've spent some time looking at this and just trying to get the feeling right. In these early stages, it can be really important not to jump in too quick, at least in my opinion, but to really hone down and get a sense of the feeling I'm trying to create, of the certain possibilities. And the art really helps with this. So I love just taking this in and thinking about what this village might be like, what the dialogue might be like, what the experience for the player is as they move through this space, and yeah, how to play with that and how to create a good experience. The first thing I'm thinking we do is get the structures in game. Let's get some guild buildings and NPCs in them. And then from there, at least we have a basis to work from. And that gets me into the dungeon generation code, or the map generation code, and it gets me thinking, how can I procedurally generate this village? One option would be to hand design this village, save that as some kind of map file, and then plunk it in. Because a procedural world, we could still have hand designed elements. But I would like to have this procedurally generated if I could. I like the idea that I could have multiple of these villages, potentially. I mean, they wouldn't all have the same NPCs, but maybe there could be small villages using the same code. Anyways, the question is, can this be procedural? And here I have a tool omelet I use sometimes to draw things, easy to make boxes. I wanted to show partly how the cities are generated currently in the Doors of Trithius. And what happens is all these buildings are placed in a stack and forces are applied. So if two buildings are intersecting, forces are applied like physics in multiple stages, so they each get pushed back a little bit, like almost like magnets, reverse magnets. They all push away from each other, and the magnets have a little bit of a buffer to create space. And this keeps happening until it reaches a stable result. And at that point, we've got a village. It's very random, looks good, and the next later pass adds doors, adds paths, and builds the village from there. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, can we do something similar? One thing I notice is there's going to be other areas like this, like a sacred tree area. For that, I'm thinking we can just have a special building. It pretends it's a building, but it reserves the space. And that becomes this area. So while this system is pushing everything away, one of those will later be selected. Maybe at the end, the centerpiece will be selected as reserved space and instead of becoming a building, that reserved centerpiece of the village becomes the sacred tree. I'm thinking that'll fit well with the current algorithm. The next thing I'm noticing, which our artist added, is these little indentations in the buildings. And I really like that, especially for an organic looking town. And these are forest druids. So I'm not sure, there's different ways these could be implemented. One way to start is we have a reserved space for a room, which is a box. Boxes are so much easier to work with in programming. And then we don't use all of it. Maybe we cut part of it. And this is still reserved, but it just is not used. We cut out a corner, and that could become some more interesting shapes. That would be a corner cut. And then maybe this would be another type of cut. There could be a few house types. Maybe they're prefabbed. Something like this is a little harder. There could be another stage where we delete a corner. Hard to do. I think that'll be more fiddly later on. Things like the potted plants, that's not hard. That can be, each room runs a bit of code and it'll have a chance to place this fire, place this bench, place potted plants, any other furniture. That's fine. As for the paths, we already have some similar code for the existing towns that'll connect everything. A custom placement algorithm. Well, I guess I should explain a little bit how it works. The code right now is there is what are called decorators. and a decorator is passed a square, and that square is turned, it gets then some logic applied to it. So for many rooms in the game currently, the logic is try to add some tables or a kitchen or whatever furniture needs to be added. Here, a decorator could be created to create this little water area, something like it, place the tree, maybe extra space, reserve 1 or 2 for some surrounding features, a little farm, a clothesline, and those could all be perhaps more rooms. We have our more squares. So when our map is being generated, some of these squares that are being separated will be buildings, and some maybe could be smaller little farm areas. And we'll know, we'll be guaranteed a certain number of farm areas from the start. We'll say when you're doing this spreading algorithm, make sure you have 2 farm areas, maybe a clothespin area, or like a clothes hanging area, and hopefully it all comes together intelligently. One problem with this kind of algorithm is it can be hard to ensure they're not in awkward positions. Like, do we really want, like, what if the farms are like all next to each other? It looks kind of like the town looks stupid, and it can happen. And this is why these algorithms are really fiddly. I'm going to spend some time now programming this. I'll come back. We'll see where I am. A half hour later, we have progress in the form of squares on the ground. I'm sure you get the idea. This is the space where the village would appear. This was basically claimed by this would be claimed by the guild. And so the map is already generated, and then the location gets added on top. And that was one thing I hadn't thought about when I went to program this, is the 2 ways maps are generated in this game. One is when the map is generated from scratch. That's how a dungeon works, and that's how a town works. The other way is when something is added to an already generated map. And that's how faction buildings work, like the bandit tents, when they just set up a tent in the forest. It doesn't regenerate the whole map, it just adds the tent. And the decision to make here for this guild is which method to use. Because I'll tell you, it's a lot easier generating a map from scratch. You don't have to worry about anything. But it's a start. It's great to see something in the game. Great to see, even though it's only squares. Next up, let's get some walls. Let's get some paths. Let's get some progress. It's a start. Can't for the life of me get the rooms to separate. I have this bit of code here, pull rooms, which I know works, and that pulls the rooms apart with a minimum buffer distance of 12. And it's how the towns generate, so all the shops are spread out. Not sure what's going on here. I've got it. The problem is this room buffer value actually does nothing. I don't know why I left it as a parameter. If we scroll up, where the rooms are created, each room gets to dictate its own buffer. And I had made that change, and I had not cleaned up properly. So my old code is deceiving me. So we have the buildings spreading out. The problem I'm trying to deal with now is the buildings sometimes get pushed back so far they get out of the reserve space and they're deleted. And for other structures, losing one room doesn't matter. We can just allocate what remains. But in this case, we want to be very specific about the number of rooms, which is tricky because the map first requests an area to place something, which is like this box, and then it generates it. And if the generation goes out of bounds, we lose buildings. What I'm thinking is this druid village might have to reserve a huge bunch of extra space. Or another solution is we could do multiple runs. If it's only a low % chance for this to happen, we could just keep generating the village until everything fits nicely. That's not ideal, though, because you really don't want to get into a situation where it keeps failing over and over. The current issue I'm having is these blocky splotches. If you've played the game enough, you probably noticed them when destroying a gremlin or a bandit fort. It leaves behind this, basically the grass gets reapplied and it's missing out on this textured effect. What happens is when the map is first generated, this textured grass is applied. Now when I tried to remove the water that was here, because we want this a flat terrain for the village, it doesn't know at that point the procedure. It's not aware of the grass texturing. And I could try to reapply it to this area, but it wouldn't be connected correctly. It uses Perlin noise to create a special kind of heat map. And it's really hard to put that back because the initial version isn't saved, and that'd be hard to do. So what I could do with this is ignore it, or I'm thinking some kind of effect where over time grass blends itself. Maybe if a grass has a certain weight, it could spread or die over time, and we would have sort of a living forest that might solve the problem everywhere. I don't know if that makes sense. Okay, basically I'm imagining each tile has like maybe a nutrients level and how well grass can grow there, and the grass just kind of changes over time and blends. And then we would just need to simulate a bit of time, and this should even out and look closer to this. This is a lot, though, of work and thought for grass. So what I'm going to do is ignore it, I think, for now. I mean, once there's paths going through here, it's not going to be too noticeable. I can always come back around. I've had this idea for more of a living environment, even trees growing. In fact, I was hoping trees wouldn't get deleted in this box. I tried to leave them and that we could see in between trees. Not sure why they're not there. There's also a new grass tile set Drixel designed as part of this mock-up. That would be nice to add too. Might be hard to get this effect where it's patches. Maybe there'd be clumps of nutrients. Nutrient-dense soil. I'm still thinking about the soil. Okay, what's important to do next? I'm thinking we have to import this new art, this wall art, and also the paths. Not looking forward to those paths, really. Those are thinner. Well, nothing to do but get into it. Let's see. The issue here is this uses the same algorithm as the towns. Now that's a thick path, not like our picture. And I'm wondering how to make it more like a village. How to make it thinner. Maybe instead of, I think the minimum thickness is 3. Maybe if we reduce that. Oh yes, I also noticed this texture doesn't blend very nicely into the thicker grass. The cobblestone is meant to be next to the thin grass. Tile map texturing can be quite a tricky problem. I haven't fully solved it yet, honestly. Because you want scenarios where the tiles will automatically blend nicely no matter what they're next to. Here we have a thinner looking path, only 2 by 2. And so the reason it's 3 thickness here is there's basically a path finding algorithm where each room is drawing its cobblestone to where it wants to go. So this room wants to go to here, and this room wants to go to here. But this room down here also wants to, and it might go up another layer to join, and that layering effect of the different paths paths crossing over each other is what creates the interesting texture, but it can also make them very thick. For example, here, so many paths are moving, it ends up being 5 thick. I wonder what this would look like just with 1 thickness. Yeah, that's bad. I did not expect it to work well. And here you can see how the algorithm's working. They're pathfinding to the other doors. It's like each room wants to hit the nearby rooms. You know what might work is if the paths in front of the doors were thin, but the areas, then the main path away from the doors is a little thicker. That would need the rooms to spread apart more, though. I'm going to fiddle with it a bit and come back. The paths are done. Well, I don't know if they're perfect. They're at least a little thinner, and that'll differentiate it from the towns. I would like them to be a little more organic looking. But that's close enough for now, I think. Been tweaking with them a bit. And now we have the art for the rooms. I really like this art, this tree, organic sort of looking house that these druids built. They don't have any doors, which is fine. This place can still be reserved as a room, and if I need to make sure a character stays in this room, that's fine. They don't need the doors to block them in. Kind of cool not having doors. Now to think about what's next. We have a starting point for these paths. We have some basic structures. There's... It's kind of hard sometimes when there's a lot of little things that need to be done. And I almost wish there's one big thing. I could just finish this project, but it's getting these decorations and getting all these little additions. It could be hard to break it down. But that's ultimately what I have to do, because I can only work on one thing at a time. So what's most important? What stands out for me? Well, I could start working on decorators, room decorators, which would receive an area and add some pots and a fire and random furniture. The issue is all the decorators so far work with clean square shapes. That means if I want these awkwardly sized buildings, which I do like, probably I should do that first so that when I start decorating these rooms, I can make sure the code works with these weird shapes. I've been staring at paint for a while, trying to figure out how to do these differently sized rooms. some of the things I'm thinking about are all the code in the game that deals with squares, because squares are so easy. For example, placing a door. There's code right now that tries to pick a door for each building, and it assumes it's a square. And all a square really is it's an XY coordinate and a width and a height. So there is an algorithm that takes this basically and outputs, let's get a little arrow, outputs a door position. That would need to be completely rewritten. And this logic, this to a door position, because there's no way to represent this with an XY width height. I thought it might be easier at first, but so one option is to have this be the room and then save like a cutaway piece, and the room is everywhere the room is handled, it also has this cutaway piece. Another option is for this to be two rooms and they just are always joined somehow. But I have another idea. What I think I'm going to do is, right now in the dungeons, when a room is generated, it has an option to fill in extra walls to create interesting shapes. So the alchemy room, for example, the library as well, when it generates, it gets its room size, but it actually places some extra walls there. And I'm wondering if we could do this. Instead of early on generating this room size and passing it everywhere with a cut area out of it, instead, we, at the end of the algorithm, we check if there's anything we can safely cut that's not near a door. Where the room really didn't get reshaped. What did get reshaped is at the very last step, we change where the wall actually gets printed. And what I'm imagining is it scans for doors before it places furniture. The actual room decorator scans for doors and will cut out, or not cut out, will place some extra walls. To give it an interesting shape. And as far as everywhere in the game is concerned, it's still a box. But with the decorator, it turns that box into something else. I just realized I've been using this term like room decorator, and that's just a word I made up. I don't know if I fully explained it. Maybe this will help make sense. How the algorithm works is first rooms are placed. And part of that placement sometimes is connectors, doors, what rooms they're connected to. A lot of decisions are made of the layout of the dungeon. We go from the top down. There's a book actually that was very influential for me working on this called A Pattern Language. And that book is about visualizing architectural spaces as a pattern language. And in that book, it outlines a method of top down where first you get like main hallways and you fill in almost like a language based on what's remaining to be solved. You fill in rooms and then furniture and stairs and hard book to summarize. It's amazing if you haven't read it. But I'm getting off track. How this applies here is what's a room decorator? Well, following the method of a pattern language, we already have our empty rooms. Now they need to get passed off to a new process to be decorated. And the room decorator places these furniture requests, places it wants furniture. And there's a decorator for every room type, like a kitchen decorator, a bedroom decorator, and it gets received a space and it figures out what to do. So it decides to place a bed, maybe a closet. It looks at the size of the space it's decorating and makes some decisions. Then when the map is generated, that becomes a placed room. And all of these requests for furniture get turned into real game entities that are rendered. Now what I'm thinking to get our weirdly shaped rooms is instead of at this higher level, higher up in the pattern language, instead of changing the size there, we change the size here. And even if this wall is placed, I'm thinking we could do a workaround where potentially the room decorator edits its own wall. I think it's going to work. I think this will work, and it'll just bite a chunk out of itself. That's the plan anyways. We'll see. I thought I'd share the book I was talking about. Here is a pattern language. And here's a sample page talking about placing closets. Hopefully maybe you can see that little diagram. says the provision and storage of closets usually comes as an afterthought. And that's what it's saying here. You already have your rooms, and then you're filling in the space after with the closets, rather than trying to design everything at once from the top down. And that's the sort of approach I've been thinking with the dungeon generation. Here I have applied a decorator that already existed, which was the alchemist room, and I applied it to every room, and you can kind of see how it applies its pattern. This is the same room, but the logic, how it fills the space depends on the room. So here's a larger room. It decided to add an extra shelf and also filled in the corner to make an interesting shape. These you probably, if you played the game, you've seen lots of these rooms in dungeons. And there's a chance for a barrel. And that's really the cool thing about this module of design, is I can reuse patterns, these decorators, anywhere. Here we want to create a decorator for the druid houses. And what I really wanted to see here mainly was what this wall looked like, this corner filled in. Because like I said, I think this is going to be the approach, fill in the corner, and then if I can just remove that bit, we can have some very interesting shaped druid houses. And it looks like our plan is going to work. I've tested by removing the top bit of wall, and it was able to be integrated into the map correctly. And you might be surprised that I didn't know exactly what was going to happen, but some of this map generation code is more than a year ago, and there's a lot of layers of logic to do with creating the map, from where it gets generated to when all the entities get placed, a lot of steps. So I was really not sure if this was going to work. And this is surprising. Oh, it just looks like the corner didn't get added, but the wall was removed successfully. I think. I can't walk there though. I'm sure I could find a workaround. I think this is going to be the approach. Kind of a funny looking building, but you can see it. We just remove those two and we've got a cool corner. And then it's all about programming a few variations, some different interesting shapes. Still some issues with the grass, but as for the shape of these druid houses, I'm very happy with it. I mean, it was a fair bit of work, but I think these little things really do add up, and I just love the look of it. Really happy with that. The paths aren't looking so bad either. Just imagine this grass all didn't look boxy. For the next steps, let's get some decorations going. Maybe some flowers outside and some inside the rooms, the potted plants and benches, and yeah. probably, if I manage to figure out how to edit all this together. You've just seen a time lapse. Here's where we are right now. Very happy with this. Obviously more to do, but we have the interesting shaped buildings. The potted plants are being placed. There's a bit of a tricky part was not just putting them at the top of the room, but detecting when the room sizes have changed and then putting them lower. Fireplaces in most of the rooms. Kind of a starting spot for this village houses. Also, the clothesline area, which will look better with some more grass textures and some added flowers and rocks, but it's coming along very close. I'm very happy with the look of this and the pathing. Had to manage the spacing a fair bit to get it just right. Next up, I'm really wondering how to do the center area with the magic tree. And that's going to take a bit of thinking because I want to make it not just a square, and I also want a bridge. And I do have the area selected, which is selecting the centermost part of the village, which is how this is being placed, which I think I talked about at the start of this video. I think that's a good place to cut, actually. In the next video, I will be working on this forest area, possibly adding some rocks, some flowers, garden area, and getting the NPCs in there, maybe getting some NPC dialogue. I want to say I'm still experimenting with these videos, experimenting a bit with how to do time lapses. I apologize if they were a bit jarring. Hopefully I'll get better. And I guess thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next devblog.